One of my favorite films of all time, Terminator. So this film, would you believe, came out in the early 1980s, I believe, and was the first real film for James Cameron, who did another film. He graduated in the epic Roger Corman B-movie kind of studio, where a lot of other famous film directors cut their teeth, including Coppola, would you believe, making B-movies, and he was fired off the set of one of the first ones he did was Piranha 2. And then when he was in Rome, he was having a sort of fever-like dream, and he came up with this character in his dream who was unstoppable. It was chasing him, a robot, a sort of a death machine robot who could not be stopped. And he basically came up with the idea and the script for Terminator. He actually was also writing, I think it was Rambo 2, I believe, for Stallone. Who also, Stallone didn't like the fact that many of the extras had extra lines than him. So he did cut out a lot of Cameron's stuff, and most of stuff appeared on the screen was actually Stallone's rewrites. But ultimately, Cameron went on to write the script. I think he wrote the script for Aliens just after that. But before, I think it was before Rambo 2, he did this script for Terminator. And I think it was all around the same time. So it just goes to show how Jim Cameron, who's obviously just come out with Avatar 3, it's one of the biggest selling sort of debut films ever. Like billions he's made already on Avatar 3. But he's done some amazing films. He started off as a truck driver, went to sort of snuck into these universities, film and USC, I think, and he borrowed manuals and he learned about filmmaking that way. And then obviously did Roger Corman's thing, and then he became this guy. It was meant to be kind of like a B movie, but ultimately it was kind of like a horror film, but it was more like a sci-fi, and I'd say it's a sci-fi horror. But ultimately he wrote probably one of the best films of all time, and then he followed up with a sequel, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, which is also seen as one of the best action sci-fis of all time as well. But the first one I actually like, a bit like Alien and Aliens. I really like Ridley Scott's first one. It's all a bit more bare bones, but a lot of tension, which really ramps up using kind of scenes and music. And they shot it mostly in LA at night, and it was real good fun. Him and Schwarzenegger actually came in, and I think in this one actually launched Schwarzenegger's career properly, but he came in originally to read for for the main protagonist, not the antagonist. He came in to play Carl Reese, who's the protagonist. But it's a very unusual film in that I think as he was reading the lines, Jim Cameron realised he's not really good for Carl Reese, and he brought the epic Michael Biehn in for who then he worked with in Aliens as well, and also in The Abyss. But ultimately, he came in as Carl Reese, the soldier that comes back from the future to save a lady who's going to become very important in the future, where machines have taken over the world, and the bad guys, the machines, send back a Terminator, a robot who's played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, to stop. Well, mainly to come back and kill the woman in question, but who's the mother of the future leader of the humanity. And Terminator effectively comes back, this T800, I've forgotten the model, because we've had many Terminator movies since, but this model, which is a robot with human skin, and comes back to kill the lady, and then Carl Reese has to prevent that happening. So it's a kind of action film thriller where, again, the sort of the heroes are on the run, and the bad guy, which is kind of like a horror movie. So the bad guy is a kind of monster who's chasing them, right? But in this case, it's not like a monster of supernatural. It's actually a machine, like a robot. And the irony of this is that this all sort of preempts the whole future where you allow machines to take over and what will happen. And currently, we're all heavily invested in AI, where we're trying to develop AGI, where it's machines have a general intelligence, super intelligence, even where they can control everything, and then we give them the reins. And this kind of almost force all that happening, and basically it's something to say, don't let the machines take over. And now we're all sort of jumping in. So obviously they haven't listened to Cameron or read his scripts or watched his films properly, but it's really interesting. So this is Arnold playing the Terminator, and in a genuinely terrifying lead protagonist character, antagonist character. And it's unusual because normally films, they have the titles that mainly follow the protagonist, right, and not the antagonist. But the film is called The Terminator, so it's actually the antagonist character is the Terminator. So it's mainly focused on Arnold, and it was a vehicle for him really to launch into Hollywood. But he played a really good role. I mean, lots of amazing little side stories and sort of interesting facts you can come across. Now Cameron is promoting Avatar 3. There's a lot of interviews all over YouTube about James Cameron, and he's coming out with, or he even did with his actor Michael Biehn, who played Reese in this film. He's doing a podcast at the moment, but if you haven't seen those podcasts, go and watch them. But he did a recent interview with Cameron. It was really interesting to see them just jamming over how the film was done, and they talk about some interesting facts from there. But Jim Cameron's being interviewed by everyone at the moment, and he's sharing a lot of interesting facts about these films that if you haven't been on YouTube properly and searched, you can find some really, really cool, interesting facts, which I won't go into. But there's been some really interesting facts, such as there was a stuntman who was hired because Arnold couldn't do all the stunts, and basically some of the epic scenes in this, the stuntman did. And the irony was the stuntman wasn't even a proper stuntman. It was his first job in Hollywood. And when the stunt coordinator realized he wasn't actually a real stuntman, he's just sort of playing along, it probably saved his life, because the stunt coordinator then sort of started training him properly. And he did some scenes such as he's on a bonnet of a car being set on fire, and there's one where he's kind of falling off the car, landing on the street, all sorts of stuff. Because obviously they beat up the robot pretty good, and they shoot up the robot pretty good, and then, obviously it's a stuntman in most of those sequences. Also the epic, I love, as you know, if you have been listening to me in indie filmmakers community in real life or in these little videos I'm doing, you'll realize that I'm a big sort of fan of special effects, not visual effects. I think visual effects are great. They've really expanded science fiction a lot. But, the original Star Wars, the original Aliens, the original Alien, the original Terminators, they were all done using mostly special effects, which is basically building robots and building models at miniature scale. So some of the future scenes in this film, where they sort of set the scene of the future, you can see some epic science fiction stuff, and it's all very similar to what they shot in Aliens, Jim Cameron's next film that he did as a sequel to Alien by Ridley Scott. And he actually had a lot of those miniatures sort of skill set that he developed here, they then did at a sort of more bigger rate in Aliens, with the models of the ships, etc. Whereas Ridley Scott, it was all based on one ship. Aliens, you have several vehicles, you have the planet, and they go down to the planet, etc. So a bit like Terminator and Terminator 2. So the original Terminator, it's mostly the science fiction bit was mostly the futuristic scene, which is built on miniature models. A few of the set pieces where they blew up certain things, like the tanker scene, and that was also done using miniatures, would you believe? And also the epic bit with the Terminator, where they had close-ups of Arnold sort of doing various things to himself, and you can see he's actually a robot, which is pretty gruesome, which is why it's more of a horror sci-fi, I feel, horror action sci-fi even. And then you've got the epic Stan Winston doing all of the models of the actual Terminator robot, but also the bits where you've got a cyborg, where you've got the human sort of robot pieces, like this scene here, and you've got like the sort of prosthetics, and you've got the models and all that stuff. So it's creature design and all that. So it's really epic film if you think about it. I don't want to spoil the film too much, but effectively it's about a race against time to save the sort of damsel in distress, if you like, and then you've got the bad guy chasing the good guy, and the good guy's there to try and save her life. And then she turns out to be a tougher person than you realise, and then she also in Terminator. Anyway, I don't want to spoil the second film, but watch the first film anyway. This is Terminator. When I was younger, I wouldn't even be allowed to watch this because it was obviously, they showed it on TV, but they showed it very late. It was the era of the VHS, the video cassette, and this was a massive hit based on the budget that it was shot on. Very low budget, I think, for what they were trying to do, and considering how much money they made off it, it was epic. And I think they were trying to replicate John Carpenter, which it probably made the biggest low budget film return ever. I think Carpenter shot, I think it was Halloween, he shot it on a very low budget, and it ended up making so much money. And I think Cameron's often quoted as he's trying to be like Carpenter, right? On the action-y side, but Carpenter also did horror, so I think he was trying to emulate Carpenter. And he also mentioned that, when he was when he was creating the lead female character, who's the mother of basically Sarah Connor, who's the mother of the future hero, John Connor, he kind of was thinking as the female lead, he was thinking very much of Jamie Lee Curtis, who played the female lead in Halloween, who has to run away from the crazed killer in that. I think it's Michael Myers? And then you've also got, he watched the first Alien, and he was emulating Ripley, who was also the lead female character, is running away from the alien creature, right, which is a horror. It was a creature. So it's interesting because if you understand that, then you understand how the Sarah Connor character was kind of written. And it's also interesting where recent times they're trying to get more women into films as more stronger leads and all of that, and often people forget that actually we've had people like the characters like Ellen Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver. You've had Jamie Lee Curtis, who played the lead in Halloween. You've had Princess Leia, Carrie Fisher's character in Star Wars. You've had Sarah Connor, who played the lead in Terminator. Very strong female leads in action, sort of sci-fi, horror films like that, and action sci-fis like Star Wars, fantasy sci-fis. So, these directors have always done very well, I think, like Ridley Scott, Lucas, James Cameron. They've always had female leads who've done very well, and sort of catered for not just female audiences, but which are half our audiences, by the way, but also male audiences. So in a kind of no nonsense way, but without also succumbing to the trope of like making all the females like having to be sort of just atypical women, which who is an atypical woman anyway, right? So I think Terminator is probably, I would say, one of the best action sci-fi thrillers of all time, and it was made in the early 1980s with not much money. So when you see all these Hollywood films that are failing and they're using their technology is so big, their visual effects departments that are extreme, and they have so much money, and they fail, it just goes to show. I mean, Terminator, they didn't really market it, the small company that made it, they didn't market it that well. I think they tried to market it as more of an action thing, where Cameron was arguing it's actually a sci-fi. But they were like, well, it's not really a sci-fi like Hollywood. It's not really sci-fi like Star Wars. But then, Cameron's argument was, well, all sci-fis don't have to occur in space, right? So very interesting, and I think, well, probably one of the best films of all time. So go and check it out. I think it's available on Amazon, or you can buy the DVD. Show support. In fact, if you look at the DVD market, when the film came out, because the marketing was quite small for it, it didn't really do that much in terms of box office marketing wise. But luckily, a few critics went and watched the previews, and so actually word of mouth went out, and some papers wrote about it, and it became sort of fan favorite. And then I think also we also had it going into kind of the Hall of Fame in films. And then in the old days, we used to have the VHS market, where films such as Blade Runner, which maybe not done so well in the box office, became fan favorites as DVD rentals, or sorry, VHS rentals. And so, it became a fan favorite that way. And Terminator made so much money off its low budget. It also made incredible amounts in the VHS side as well afterwards. So kind of sealed the deal on Cameron and Gail Hurd, who was the producer, who he then married afterwards, and also for Arnie, launched Arnie into the stratosphere on his career as well. So this is Terminator. Go and check it out wherever you can, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.